Train the muscles, not the joints.
Welcome back to Natural Bodybuilding. Mountain. And today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about powerlifting squats versus bodybuilding squats. And there are some common facts about these two squats that most of you know. So I'm just going to outline those first and then talk about another way of looking at things so that you can make a better decision about what you should be doing for your own training. Now, a lot of people, when they think of powerlifting squats, they think of having to go parallel. You know, their femur has to be parallel to the ground, and they're thinking primarily of getting to that depth is the most important thing because that's what you need to do in competitions. But the other thing that you have to take into account is that powerlifters don't really care what muscles they recruit as long as it's the most efficient muscles or the efficient way to get that weight from point A to point B. So as you notice, some powerlifters will be almost doing a glorified deadlift with a bar on their back in order to get the weight up, while other ones may have more a Tom Platzish type of technique, although that's pretty rare. Most of them will be trying to get their glutes and their hamstrings as much into the lift as possible, because that's basically your power muscles, is your ass and your hamstrings, right? Your quads are not exactly power muscles, they're more strength endurance. And by doing this, the powerlifters are recruiting the most amount of strength they can, or power they can. They're trying to primarily say, how do I explode from the bottom to the top? But it doesn't really matter what muscles I'm recruiting. And this is also true when you look at the width of their stance. They're also saying, hey, I have to, once again, get this weight down and get it back up to the proper depth. And whether they're doing a wide stance or a narrow stance doesn't really matter to them as much as which stance is going to help them lift the most amount of weight. Regardless of whether they're recruiting more lower back in the process, or they're abductors or adductors, whatever, they don't care. It's more about trying to get that weight from point A to point B. And sometimes by doing a wider stance, they have less range of motion. Basically, they don't have to travel as far as well in order to get that weight up. So that's another factor. It's kind of like a sumo deadlift instead of a normal deadlift. So that's one thing. And also with powerlifting, we can also talk about bar positioning. A lot of times powerlifters will do a low bar squat instead of a high bar, because once again, that helps them deal with the fact that they're going to be recruiting a lot of lower back. So obviously if I move the bar from here down more to here, when I bend over, there's going to be more mechanical advantage in the process. So it's not going to be as much weight on the lower back. Imagine if you had the weight on top of your head, right? It'd be farther away from the pivot point, which is the hip. So it would be a lot heavier. 200 pounds would be a lot heavier up here as opposed to down here. So that's kind of the logic around the powerlifting squat. Now with the bodybuilding squat, usually the bar is sitting in a higher position, although it doesn't have to, because I did a lot of low bar squats as well for myself and found that low bar was a better way for me to recruit my quadriceps and hamstrings. For me, I mean, it might be different for you, but it was better for me. But not only is the bar position different with a bodybuilder squat, but also you'll notice that the leg positions are different and the depth can vary. Some bodybuilders feel like they get the most amount of leg development from a deeper squat. Some of them get it from a shallower squat like myself. And at the same time, bodybuilders are using higher rep ranges to promote that hypertrophy. So some bodybuilders are extremely strong as well in the squat, but their technique will vary from the powerlifting squat because they're trying to find a way to put the tension on the muscles as efficiently as possible. And although they'll challenge themselves with heavier weights to do so, they never lift the weight just to lift the weight. They're lifting it in a certain way. So if they feel like the tension is leaving their quads and leaving their hamstrings and moving more to the lower back and so forth, they will not sacrifice their technique in order to get more weight up. So using this premise, myself when I squat, I'm obviously not squatting to powerlift. I'm squatting in order to put stress on the legs and put the least amount of stress on the joints. As far as I'm not trying to throw my knees off, like I'm not wrapping my knees, I'm not using a belt. And that's another thing. A lot of guys are just using knee wraps or knee sleeves and they're using belts and they're trying to protect their joints, but at the same time, they're also giving themselves a mechanical advantage just to lift more weight. But it's arguable whether they're putting more stress on the muscles by doing that. If anything, they're actually not. And I know this because when I used to use knee wraps, there was a springiness in the knees, right? Because the elasticity of those wraps would basically cause the knees to kind of want to extend, or the legs to extend. So when I stopped using knee wraps, I noticed my quads had to work a lot harder to do the same amount of weight. So that's why I stopped using knee wraps altogether, and I stopped using a belt, because I wanted all of my muscles to get worked properly. Now, I'm not saying you have to do what I'm doing, but that's what I found. And I also noticed that if I go wider in the squat, I can go deeper, and it can look prettier. It can look better for depth reasons. But I also noticed that I didn't get as much quadricep growth from it. It was more comfortable to go down deeper, but my quads were not necessarily getting stressed. So at some point I started to narrow up the stance, not super narrow, but just shoulder width. And then by doing so, I found that the stress was constant tension on the vastus lateralis, which is the outer sweep of the quads, and the hamstrings. And I got the best bang for my buck by doing that. I got way better leg development. And yes, it looks stupid because I couldn't go down as far, right? I wasn't going parallel, and people be like, well, you're not going down deep enough. But I wasn't worried about depth from a powerlifting point of view. I was worried about where are the stresses playing out? Are they primarily playing out on the legs, or am I transferring all the stress to the hips and the abductors and the lower back, right? And so by playing around with your bar position and playing around with your width of your stance, you can start to feel your way through where is the stress playing out, and are you actually getting the stress where you want it? And if you make your decision based on this, you're actually bodybuilding. If you're making the decision based on how much weight you can get up, and squatting a certain way helps you just lift more weight for the sake of it, then you're powerlifting and you're not necessarily bodybuilding. So the truth is, there are a lot of techniques out there that all of a sudden you'll be able to lift 50 or 100 pounds more on a given exercise, but does that mean you're actually stressing the muscle the way you want? So it might be good for bragging rights, but at the same time, it's not always the most efficient way to lift. So there are guys at the gym right now, they're just primarily deadlifting from the floor and so forth. And if we had a deadlifting contest, they would beat me from deadlifting from the floor. But if we actually looked at the way I'm built and the way they're built, and we said, okay, let's go from the same angle when we're deadlifting and then lift from there, we probably would be pretty even, or I'd probably be stronger than they are in some ways, So it's always about the way your body is built and how the forces are playing out. And that's what my point is. It's not always so simple as just how much do you lift, because how you lift will determine how much weight you can lift. And if you lift just for the sake of lifting more weight, you're not necessarily going to be hitting the muscles. Sometimes you're just using glorified momentum, or like you see with guys on the bench press, they basically do a glorified decline, because their upper back is in a U. So they're not necessarily getting the chest development from that. So are you really stronger? No, it's in a lot of cases, it's just a legal way, right? Like competition legal standard way of cheating. And that's what's helping people lift more weight. It's not necessarily putting more stress on the muscle or giving you a greater benefit. If anything, a lot of times it's giving you next to no benefit, or at least the benefit in the wrong area, or the area that's not necessarily what you need. So yeah, if you want to think like a bodybuilder, just feel where the forces are playing out. And regardless of range of motion, regardless of foot stance, whether it's wide, whether it's narrow, pay attention to that stuff. And then in the long run, you're going to get a lot more leg development. Because what happened with me, because I was doing really wide stances when I first started squatting, because I had a martial arts background, and we were doing all these, these shikodachi stances and the zenkutsudachi, like forward leaning stance, and then the sumo stance and so forth. And because of that, I had supreme coordination with those stances. So that's how I was squatting at first. But I wasn't getting the leg development from it. But once I narrowed the stance up a bit, and I started doing that constant tension sort of thing, then my outer sweep of my quads started to come into play. And I started to feel like my sets were taking my legs to failure, not necessarily my lower back or different parts of the sides of my hips and so forth. So, you got to play around with this, but there is a difference, a very subtle difference between the two, powerlifting and bodybuilding, and there's benefits to both. But you have to decide which one's going to help you attain your goals. But no matter which way you turn, make sure first and foremost your joints aren't taking all the stress. That's the thing. And you're not getting injured, because whatever technique injures you cannot be the right technique. And then from there, build upon where are you feeling those forces? Are you feeling them in this muscle or that muscle and so forth? mountain. So yeah, I hope this helps out in your training, guys. Thanks a lot for watching. If you need to get a hold of me, just go to naturalgalantbodybuilding.com, and thanks to the Patreon supporters, and take care for now.